everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar related to our new MA program in Global Irish Studies. My name is Tina Moran. I'm a lecturer in English in the School of English, Irish and Communication here at UL. And my colleagues with me are Dr. Aileen Dillane, who's a music specialist, and Dr. David Fleming, who is a specialist in modern Irish history.
Thanks, Tina. It's interesting to be doing this in situ together because already I feel like I want to change what I want to talk about. So I'm an ethnomusicologist, and that means I consider why do people make music and why does that matter? And when it comes to Ireland and the global Irish, music is really at the centre of that narrative for so many reasons. As people migrate and move across the world, so too does music. And actually with technological innovation, sometimes music precedes that movement. And so much of my work has centred in different sites across the world, but the place with which I've engaged the longest in many ways is the city of Chicago. I've done fieldwork there as a doctoral student, and I continue to return there regularly. And so fieldwork, you're doing it in situ with musicians and music makers and venue owners, festival sites. But there's a huge historical dimension to doing that as well. And one of the tropes, I guess, that emerges all the time when it comes to something like Irish music, in the broadest sense, not just traditional music, is how tethered it is to identity, and more recently, identity politics. And sometimes this idea that Tina just spoke about, this idea of, what is Ireland and how is it articulated through works like the novel or through musical productions, whether it's song recordings or performances or parades. I think one of the things we really want to do in this program is to kind of unpack the multiple levels of identification around Irishness, and for me particularly in Irish America, because there is no singular one. It changes according to the location, it changes according to the historical moment, it changes according to the kinds of tropes and narratives that dominate. And Chicago is an interesting site in that respect, because unlike maybe some East Coast sites, when people first migrated to Chicago prior to the Great Fire of 1871, but especially after that, and of course post-famine, the narrative that dominates the Chicago Irish for a very long time has been working class, Catholic-based, democratic, union-oriented, and that's certainly true, and there are generations of Irish Americans in Chicago that engage in that level, but they're also pre that. There's a Scots-Irish that were there, and of course, what is the nature of Irish identity right now, and in the migrations from the 60s, the 90s during the tech revolution. All of these things are manifest actually in music making and music engagement. So some of the prominent tropes of Irishness that you encounter right from the early days, whether it's Thomas Moore's Melodies, whether it's the early vaudeville, whether it's Tin Pan Alley recordings in the 20th century, whether it's the emergence of songs like Túil or Laddie versus other types of balladry, whatever it is, these are all kind of sensuous products and performance moments that deeply, deeply implicate people in their notion of what constitutes Irishness. So very briefly, what I want to do is maybe rupture that Chicago narrative a little bit with talking briefly about an exhibition that was held in the Art Institute of Chicago in 2015. And it was called Ireland, Crossroads of Art and Design. And it was the first time there had been such a staging of Irish artifacts in North America to this degree. There was over 300 artifacts. Most of them came from North American owners. But what was particularly interesting for me was that it was the first time that the Art Institute allowed for the commissioning of a CD of music to complement the mission of this particular exhibition. And the reason why in many ways that was very important was because this exhibition was just curated for and put together for a Chicago audience. And while you have tourists coming in, it was leaning back into 200 years of kind of Irishness. And this is something that I think David will speak to in a while, and certainly you've alluded to it. One of the most interesting aspects of this exhibition was it was material culture, and instruments like the Egan harp from the 18th century, early 19th century, was that this was the first time, these were Anglo-Irish crafts, arts and crafts. So pre-famine, pre-1840s, in a city known for its kind of very particular kind of Irish-American Catholic heritage. And there was a sense of how would people react to this, How do we accommodate Anglo-Irish heritage within the narrative of what constitutes Ireland and Irishness? And these are all things that are really important right now with Brexit, to be honest. And how do we expand those notions? So the CD itself, I published an article recently in Era Ireland on this. It's the Journal of the Irish American Cultural Institute, if you want to check it out. And you know, the process by which this music was curated and mediated is central to all of this. It was a very non-sectarian type of act, and people were very conscious that there are multiple ways of expressing your ethnicity and your identity, and that there needs to be a plurality, basically, of Irish identification. And so one of the musicians who features on this is the composer Liz Carroll. She's been celebrated for Liz Carroll Day in Chicago. She's won awards from the various cultural institutions in the States. She's recorded lots of CDs of her own music. And the Egan Harp came from an Irish-American family who now curate or rather own the O'Brien Collection of Irish Art in Chicago. And their curator is Marty Fahey, who's also a first-generation Irish-American like Liz Carroll. And he's very involved in that relationship between art and music. And so, yeah, this exhibition was hugely popular, and it gave people in Chicago and tourists who came to Chicago, where they dyed their evergreen on St. Patrick's Day, a really different sense of the multiplicity of Ireland, and not just the singular immigration narrative. At the same time, it's very important to honour those narratives too, and to see them in song texts and song performances. And I guess part of this then is a bigger project for me. I'm writing a book on this right now. And I'm trying to think about ways in which the nostalgic, the ersatz nostalgic sentimentality, rebel songs, political movements, the shift in Irish American identity and in identity politics is kind of panning out in a place like Chicago, and the implication of that more broadly, particularly at a time when we're seeing a rise in white nationalism. And how maybe Irish musics and Irish American musics are implicated potentially in all of that. So, you know, part of this course would be about bringing in critical race theory, would be about critiquing identity and identity politics. And will also be about music making and embodiment, because in the end, some of these songs and musics, when you encounter them, they bypass cognition, they go straight into something. So we've been trained in a way to respond to these. What are those processes? Who makes the music, and why does that matter? Why should we care about these things? And what is underpinning these acts ideologically? These are the kinds of things that really interest me. And if they interest you, I'd love to talk to you about them. And finally, I'll just mention that I'm also involved in a cluster here of popular music, popular culture. So we do a lot of things around the city on popular culture and popular music in Ireland. And this is of big interest. And in many ways, I guess, we're not, in the Irish World Academy in particular, we don't put one music as a preferential or hierarchical sense of music. So we're interested in all facets of culture. And again, I'd reiterate, music moves in very dynamic ways. And trying to engage with that is at the heart of what we do in the Academy and here in the US.